2017 Dialogues is a three-part series across ASEAN's three pillars: political security, economic, and social-cultural. Our hashtags for today's event are hashtag ASEAN 2017 Dialogues and hashtag ASEAN 2017. Tune in to ASEAN 2017 Facebook page for live updates. Thank you. May I request everyone to please rise for the ASEAN hymn.
Raise our flag, rise sky high, embrace the pride in our heart. ASEAN, we are bonded as one, looking out to the world. For peace our goal from the very start, and prosperity to last. We dare to share together for ASEAN. We dare to share, for it's the way of
ASEAN spirit soar above all frailties and boundaries. ASEAN spirit war against war's pests and miseries. ASEAN spirit war against war's pests and miseries. ASEAN spirit soar to greater heights and victories. ASEAN spirit, free us from the tyranny of ignorance. Release us from the shackles of intolerance, and help us divine and united governance. ASEAN spirit soar above all frailties and boundaries. ASEAN spirit soar to greater heights and victories. ASEAN spirit lead us to justice and the common good. Transform us into grains to feed, steel to build, and re-rose most precious diamond for the world. ASEAN spirit soar above all frailties and boundaries. ASEAN spirit soar to greater heights and victories. ASEAN spirit lead us to justice and the common good. Transform us into grains to feed, steel to build, and re-rose most precious diamond for the world. Transform us into grains to feed, steel to build, and re-rose most precious diamond for the world.
Please be seated. Welcome to the third and final ASEAN 2017 Dialogues titled ASEAN Identity. To formally welcome us to today's event, let us call on ASEAN 2017 Committee on Media Affairs and Strategic Communications Chair, Undersecretary Noel George Puyat of the Presidential Communications Operations Office.
Distinguished guests and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. As we begin the final leg of our ASEAN 2017 Dialogues, let me first welcome our esteemed guest today, Department of Social Welfare and Development Secretary Judy Tagiwalo, former Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Delia Albert, National Commission for Culture and the Arts International Affairs Office Head, Ms. Mary Ann Louise, and International Olympic Committee member, Ms. Mikey Cojuangco, as well as our friends from the private sector. Thank you very much for accommodating us in your busy schedules. I also wish to extend our thanks to our valuable partners for change, Asia Society Philippines and the Asian Institute of Management. Ladies and gentlemen, it seems as if it was only yesterday when we kicked off this dialogue. I still remember when we inaugurated this webinar and forum series more than a month ago. Our expectations were not only met, but were surpassed when we saw how far the reach of technology has helped us deliver the message of promoting ASEAN and tackle issues related to its three community pillars. And as we take this opportunity to discuss yet another issue relevant to ASEAN, we look inward into ourselves and what sets a citizen of ASEAN apart from other cultures, what makes us unique as a people, and the definition of ASEAN identity. As our region becomes more interconnected, the need to identify ourselves becomes more discernible. We are unique, yes. We are united, yes. But what separates us from other regional communities is that we respect and cherish our diversity in culture. All our beliefs might not be in sync with each other, but we all believe that we are one in spirit. The different cultures of ASEAN, no matter how different they are, can be complementary to each other as long as everyone is willing to sit down, talk, and maintain a high respect towards each other. During our previous discussions, we have delved into matters regarding the economy that drives our livelihood and the political mechanisms that safeguard our ways of life. Today, let us focus on the last but absolutely not the least important pillar, the socio-cultural community. ASEAN prides itself for being people-oriented and people-centered. However, we want to draw clearer lines on how this is so. That way, we can be sure that our collective interest is aligned with the policies and norms which we practice in ASEAN. We can also ensure that ASEAN integration will ultimately improve the lives of every ASEAN citizen. The theme, Stronger Together, entails that as our region approaches full integration, ASEAN must be able to make the transition as smooth as possible and with the least amount of change in our daily lives, ensuring that the morale of the working class will remain strong. We cannot deny that manpower is essential for our progress as a region, and luckily enough, ASEAN has a lot of it. At the moment, we have the third largest labor force in the world, and that means that the government must implement cultural initiatives that would sync our local migrant workers to coexist in a mutually beneficial and comfortable environment. ASEAN integration should therefore improve the free flow of labor between ASEAN states, and while at the same time strengthen cultural ties at home. Indeed, our governments continue to pursue efforts on improving labor mobility and quality of life of its migrant workers. However, we all must do our part in order for our ASEAN community to achieve significant and sustainable progress. We have to work together, and we must put in our best efforts to be one with the ASEAN spirit and incorporate aspects of our collective cultures into our homes and into our lives. I urge you all to join us as we work hard towards a better future for our region, while embracing ASEAN's distinct cultural identity of amity and mutual respect that fosters appreciation for diversity and multiculturalism. We hope that you have learned a lot during the course of our dialogues on ASEAN's three pillars. We also invite you to take part in the event we have lined up this coming week as we all gather for the grand celebration of ASEAN's 50th year. Let us show the world how we appreciate the company and support of our ASEAN neighbors. Let us become one with ASEAN. Thank you and a pleasant afternoon to everyone. Mabuhay po kayo.
Thank you, Undersecretary Noel Puyat. To welcome us to today's event and introduce our keynote speaker, may we call on Ms. Suyin Liu Lee, Executive Director of Asia Society Philippines.
Secretary Judy Tagiwalo, Ambassador Delia Albert, Ambassador Wilfredo Villacorta, Ambassador Belen Anota, Ambassador Kok Lee Peng, Undersecretary Noel Puyat, Assistant Secretary Kissinger Reyes, Assistant Secretary Chris Ablan. Honorable officials and distinguished guests, good afternoon. On behalf of Asia Society Philippines, I am privileged to welcome you to the final ASEAN Dialogue, ASEAN Identity. Asia Society Philippines is the only center in Southeast Asia among Asia Society's 12 global centers. It is critical for us to pursue efforts in spreading the mission and vision of ASEAN, but more importantly, to share practical means for Filipinos to personally engage in the integration. It is our mission to create opportunities for dialogue, to bridge gaps between people and institutions in the Philippines, in ASEAN, and with our greater Asian and Western neighbors. In April 2017, the Philippine Institute of Development Studies released a study on what ASEAN means to ASEAN peoples, utilizing the Philippines as the focus group. The conclusion reports both survey respondents and participants in the focus group discussions were not only aware of ASEAN, they also moderately identified themselves as ASEAN citizens, with their sense of identification growing with age and experience. It also includes that further information has on its activities and accomplishments should be disseminated to the public and through media. This is the primary reason why these ASEAN dialogues were developed. Participation is not limited to all of you in the room today, but our fellow Filipinos who have logged in online. Asia Society Philippines would like to thank the Presidential Communications Operations Office, Committee on Media Affairs and Strategic Communications, and the Asian Institute of Management for inviting us to take part in this initiative. We look forward to an informative discussion as we listen to the measures that our leaders are taking to respond to emerging and prevailing issues. We thank our guest speakers who will share their personal experiences on how ASEAN integration naturally and seamlessly permeates everyday life. We hope that each of you leave having a sense that you are part of one community that together we make a remarked difference in the world. It is as simple as what this book, Market Day, reveals in the eyes of a child. In the 10 different countries, our strength is a result of a myriad of similarities and uniquely complementary attributes. Thank you.
Thank you for the message, Ms. Suyin Lee. Now, may we call on our special keynote speaker, Secretary Judy Tagualo of the Department of Social Welfare and Development, the lead agency for the ASEAN Socio-Cultural Pillar. Secretary Tagualo, please come on stage.
Thank you, esteemed colleagues in government, guests, friends. The ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community is known as the People's Pillar. I believe it is at the heart of ASEAN. We spearhead 2 of the 6 thematic priorities under the Philippine chairship of ASEAN this year: a people-oriented and people-centered ASEAN, and ASEAN's resiliency. In the ASCC pillar, we discuss various sectors of our different nations We discuss how our cultures interrelate. It amazes me how Filipinos now are, for lack of a better term, ASEAN savvy. Thanks to the ASEAN Framework Agreement on Visa Exemption and Budget Airlines, many Filipinos have already traveled across ASEAN countries, eaten tom yum and related it with our sinigang, marveled at Angkor Wat, and Instagrammed themselves under Kuchi Tunnel or basking in Bali. But there is more than meets the eye. What does it take to have a people-oriented and people-centered ASEAN, you may ask? It means the promotion and protection of rights of women, children, persons with disability, elderly, indigenous peoples, and vulnerable communities. ASEAN shares experience and creates a common understanding of social issues towards effective and sustainable actions. And as such, I am happy to note that the ASEAN has adopted, approved various agreements and declarations related to the rights of children, the advancement of women's status, the protection of older persons, as well as on disaster management and emergency response. The conditions that necessitated the creation of landmark laws in ASEAN through the agreements and declaration as well in our various countries persist. This is where we can learn a lot from our neighbors. Regional cooperations, ASEAN included, were created out of need and recognition. The need for promotion of peace and economic collaboration and recognition of common interests and its better promotion through cooperation. We accept the fact that we all live in one biosphere, that is the Earth. There are issues that are transnational and borderless. The ASCC tackles issues concerning environment and health. Top of our mind is climate change, to which the Philippines is very vulnerable. Aside from the hazards it brings, climate change threatens our food security. But also ASEAN, through its One ASEAN, One Response, has made sure that assistance to various countries battered by calamities are provided assistance. And the Philippines was lucky enough to receive last Friday a one airplane load of assistance for Marawi. This included 600 tents and more than 600 hygiene kits, and it was the Malaysian Air Force that brought these goods to our people. We thank ASEAN for taking to heart our assistance to each other through the One ASEAN, One Response Agreement. What are the accomplishments of the ASCC under the Philippine chairship? We are the chair of the ASCC this year, the 50th anniversary of the ASEAN. So during the last ASEAN summit, the leaders signed the Loan Declaration adopted during the said summit, the ASEAN Declaration on the role of the civil service as a catalyst for achieving the ASEAN Community Vision 2025. This declaration highlights the critical role of the civil service in ASEAN community building. We are confident that the ASEAN instrument for the protection and promotion of the rights of migrant workers will be signed by the ASEAN leaders in the 31st ASEAN Summit this November. In the ASEAN Ministerial Meeting of ASCC last March in Iloilo, we agreed to promote the agenda on the culture of prevention as a broad cross-cutting initiative to address measures against extremism, for peace, as well as for cross-cultural exchanges. Finally, again, I would like to underscore the need to take ASEAN to the people. ASEAN meetings and conferences are generally attended by representatives and officials and are held in hotels or in conference venues. Our challenge remains to take ASEAN to the people. I commend the PCOO for creating alternative medium for propagating ASEAN awareness through comics, through the children's books, and through online media. I commend our organizing agencies for including CSOs in the conferences. We intentionally launched the Philippine hosting of the ASCC pillar in Angeles City, in a city mall, to involve more people in understanding what ASEAN is and what is its relevance to the Filipino people. ASEAN is ASEAN because of its people. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the message, Secretary Tagualo. Please stay on stage for a photo and handover of the certificate and token of appreciation. Secretary Tagualo, may we request you to please be on stage for the handover of the certificate and token of appreciation. Undersecretary Noel George Puyat, Assistant Secretary Kissinger Reyes, and Ms. Suyan Liu Lee, please come on stage for the photo. Once again, thank you very much, Secretary Tagualo of DSWD. The topic for our first panel is a primer on the ASEAN Social-Cultural Pillar. First up, may we request Administrator Hans Kakdak to please be on the podium. May we call onto the podium Ms. Mary Ann Lewis from the National Commission for Culture and the Arts, or NCCA.
Okay, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. This is a presentation on the government's efforts in promoting ASEAN awareness and how it facilitates the strengthening of the ASEAN identity. Next slide, please. Since I come from the cultural sector, I shall be presenting the initiatives relevant to the Philippines ASEAN Committee on Culture and Information, and particularly the Subcommittee on Culture, which the NCCA belongs. So this will be the outline of this presentation. Next slide, please. Next slide. The ASEAN Committee on Culture and Information was established in 1978, the same year that ASEAN foreign ministers agreed to set up an ASEAN Cultural Fund to achieve excellence in all aspects of cooperation in the fields of culture and information, to enhance mutual understanding and solidarity among the ASEAN community, and to further regional development and effectively implement projects within and outside the region. Next slide. The Philippines ASEAN Committee on Culture and Information, or COCI, is headed by the Department of Foreign Affairs Office of ASEAN Affairs as the Director General, and it operates through the two subcommittees, the Subcommittee on Culture with the NCCA and the Cultural Center of the Philippines. The second subcommittee is on Information, headed by the Presidential Communications Operations Office, and with its member agencies, Philippine Information Agency, PTV4, and the Philippine Broadcasting Service. Next slide, please. Next slide. The ASEAN COCI implements projects that promotes the elements of building the ASEAN identity, which is the basis of Southeast Asia's regional interests. It is our collective personality, norms, values, and beliefs, as well as aspirations as one ASEAN community. These activities mainstream and promote greater awareness and common values in the spirit of unity and diversity at all levels of society. Next slide. Towards this end, projects are focused on the promotion of ASEAN awareness and a sense of community, preservation and promotion of ASEAN cultural heritage, promotion of cultural creativity and industry, engagement with the community, and human resource development. Next slide. Projects and activities include region-wide people-to-people exchanges, festivals, performances, and exhibitions, including competitions, awards, recognitions, seminars, trainings, and workshops, including conferences and forums, and publications and video documentations for both the culture and information sectors. Next slide. To cite some examples, the Subcommittee on Culture facilitated the production of a coffee table book entitled Water, a Unifying Force in ASEAN. Next is a workshop that gathered experts from the region to discuss the prevention of illicit transfer and illegal trafficking of cultural properties. Another is a symposium involving ASEAN museum directors and their engagement with the community. And last is the Best of ASEAN Performing Arts series, featuring a performance from the ASEAN member states every year, which is coordinated by the ASEAN Secretariat to raise ASEAN awareness about the region's rich and diverse cultures. Next slide, please. Among the flagship projects of the Subcommittee on Culture that have been initiated by the Philippines are the ASEAN Youth Camp, which is hosted or implemented by rotation by the ASEAN member states. And next slide. Realizing Rama, a large-scale contemporary performing arts touring production based on the Ramayana epic, which is common among the ASEAN member states, featuring artists from the ASEAN member states. Next slide, please. Among the activities of the information sector are the development of an ASEAN computer game. It's called Asean Quest, patterned after the popular computer game Tomb Raider. The game was developed by professors from the De La Salle University and features a storyline that familiarizes players about ASEAN. Next is an ASEAN in Action and the ASEAN television news programs, which involved the exchange of news about the region among radio and television broadcasters respectively for the last 15 years. Last is the ASEAN Cooperation in Digital Broadcasting, including working towards an analog switch-off date, which was another important activity of the information sector. Next slide. Among the Philippines Subcommittee on Information Initiatives are the ASEAN Quiz at national and regional levels, which is now on its 7th year. The ASEAN Quiz is a biannual competition participated in by students of private and public secondary schools from the 10 AMS. The formulation of a national communications plan in support of the ASEAN socio-cultural community and technical workshops involving the ASEAN member states were also significant initiatives of the SCI Philippines. One of the most notable activities supported by the ASEAN COCI was the restoration efforts for sites hit by Typhoon Haiyan and earthquake in the Visayas region of the Philippines in 2013. This was unusual in the sense that it was a deviation from the usual people-to-people exchanges, festivals, workshops, and forums which the ASEAN COCI usually initiates. I have a video of that, but it takes 7 minutes, so we'll see if I can show it later. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, to carry out the ASEAN leaders' vision to create a community of caring societies, conscious of its historical ties, aware of its regional heritage, and bound by a common regional identity, the following sectoral bodies are in place. The ASEAN ministers responsible for culture and the arts, or AMCA, and the ASEAN ministers responsible for information. Next slide, please. UNESCO defines culture as the whole complex of distinctive spiritual, material, intellectual, and emotional features that characterize a society or a social group. It includes not only the arts and letters, but also modes of life, the fundamental rights of the human being, value systems, traditions, and beliefs. With this in mind, we come to establish that the 3 pillars, political security, economic, socio-cultural, are not really exclusive of each other, but are closely linked and mutually reinforcing to ensure the realization of a stable and prosperous community. The ASCC that is committed to create a people-oriented and socially responsible ASEAN only underscores the ASEAN byword of a caring and sharing society. All things considered, ASEAN is meant to serve its peoples, uplifting the quality of lives for the betterment of the whole region. Culture and information cuts across all sectors within these 3 pillars. Culture is embedded in value systems and modes of life that fundamentally affects and dictates how governments are ran. The information sector serves to disseminate the cross-cutting issues all across the board and promotes awareness of a regional identity. With the theme Partnering for Change, Engaging the World, ASEAN COCI Philippines attempts to address cross-cutting concerns by strengthening its cultural soft diplomacy efforts. Through increased people-to-people contacts and exchanges, a national consciousness of our shared regional identity is hoped to be achieved. In the chairmanship of the Philippines during ASEAN's 50th anniversary, the Philippines Subcommittee on Culture strengthens its campaign to raise awareness of the ASEAN identity by means of implementing the following activities. Next slide, please. We have first the ASEAN Landmark Lighting Program, to which I'm inviting everybody to attend on August 8th at the CCP grounds and at the BGC Taguig. It involves the lighting of landmarks in at least 50 cities or towns in the Philippines and specially designed giant lanterns from Pampanga featuring the ASEAN logo and relevant icons which is common in ASEAN. This activity will be held simultaneously in the evening of August 8th in all the capitals of the ASEAN member states. ASEAN Spirit, the Philippines ASEAN Chairmanship theme song, which was commissioned by the NCCA and whose MTV was produced by the PCOO, which you saw earlier. Okay. Woven Identities, Clothing Traditions in ASEAN is an exhibition that highlights the traditional attires as part of the tangible heritage that is unique to each and shared among the 10 ASEAN member states. This will be installed at the NAIA Terminal 3. Okay, I'm told time's up, so thank you very much. And the list goes on. So if you want to know more about our activities, you can approach me later. Thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis. We'll be giving everyone blank index cards for questions. Please write your name and affiliation, then hand it to our ushers for us to collate and share with the moderator during our open forum. May we now ask our moderator, Assistant Secretary Chris Ablan, to moderate the panel on the primer of the ASEAN Social Cultural Pillar. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you. May I call on Ma'am Lewis again back on stage for our one-person panel. We also invited Administrator, Ma'am, come here next to, no, it's all right. We invited Administrator Hans Kakdat. Unfortunately, he can't make it this afternoon because he's sick. So with that, no, we're still here with Ma'am Marianne Lewis of the NCCA, and we'll be asking some questions. The way the dialogue, and this dialogue is the third of 3 dialogues, and we feel the most relevant to Filipinos, as mentioned by Secretary Taguiwalo, this is the people's pillar. And right now, the dialogue is being broadcasted on PTV and live on Facebook, and more importantly, it's going to be recorded and uploaded on YouTube. So many Filipinos, as well as many members and many citizens of ASEAN member states who aren't able to participate this afternoon will be able to watch it and see and learn about ASEAN, especially as we celebrate the 50th anniversary of ASEAN. All right, so as mentioned by our host earlier, we're distributing index cards, and if you have any questions to any of our panelists, and you have the names of our panelists on your program, you can just give it to any of our ushers, and then they'll give it to me, and I'll read out the questions. Likewise, for those of us viewing this on Facebook or on PTV, we encourage you to, if you have any questions regarding the social cultural pillar of ASEAN or the people's pillar, use the hashtag ASEAN 2017 Dialogues. Again, it's hashtag ASEAN 2017 Dialogues, and we'll read it, and hopefully our panelists, including Ma'am Marianne, will be able to answer your questions. It's unfortunate that Administrator Kakdak couldn't join us because I know a big concern of many Filipinos is how are they able to benefit from ASEAN with regard to, for work. No? If they want to work in Brunei, in Thailand, in Malaysia, what did they get from ASEAN? So hopefully, the other panelists will be able to answer that particular question. So with us this afternoon is Ma'am Marian Luis, sorry, I keep on making your name into an English Luis. Marian Luis, of the NCCA. And I'd like to ask, you were cut short by our moderator earlier, Mary Ann, but for example, you discussed earlier the different projects initiated of this celebration of ASEAN, and I didn't know that we're actually developing a video game, and I'm happy that there's the professors from the DLSU are making up a video game so that we will replace ASEAN game. We will replace the Dota game with the ASEAN game. And it's very nice, no, to learn about the other projects in the past. But looking towards the future and not so far away, next week, which is the celebration of the 50th anniversary of ASEAN, we have several activities then. Aside from the lighting activity that will happen on August 8th, can you share with us the other activities? So whatever's on the screen, maybe the technician can show us, and Ma'am Marian can show us through what are the other activities so that Filipinos will be able to learn more about ASEAN.
Thank you very much. First, I just want to correct you there. The Asean Quest, the computer game, has already finished. It was launched in 2015, but it's only available on iPad. So hopefully we can get another version of that, which will be available for our other smartphones. So the activities that we have to commemorate the 50th anniversary, as I mentioned earlier, involves will be three exhibitions that will be set up at the NAIA to welcome delegates and participants for the ASEAN-related meetings, as well as to welcome the general traveling public. So we have Clothing Traditions of ASEAN, which we also are doing in collaboration with the embassies of the ASEAN member states here. So it will feature the different clothing traditions of the ASEAN member states, which is unique to them and which is also shared by the other ASEAN member states. And thank you, Ambassador, for donating a pair of Singaporean traditional costumes. And also we also have, hold on, sorry, I have to look at my cheat sheet here.
So while Marianne is looking for some other projects of the NCCA, we have a lot of viewers on Facebook, Filipinos all over the world, as far as Kuwait, Abu Dhabi, as close as home as here in Mindanao, Visayas. You have Filipinos watching from Brunei, Malaysia, and they're really interested. And hopefully this afternoon's dialogue will be beneficial to everyone. Yes, we have other activities.
Yes, we also have the Philippines in ASEAN exhibit, which is an exhibition that highlights the uniqueness of each ASEAN country, the commonalities of ASEAN countries and the Philippines and the Philippine chairmanship of ASEAN, and to define ASEAN and how it affects the Filipinos. It will create a vibrant traveling exhibition with a module application component, generating the relevant and continuous feedback and conversation among the target audience and promote further understanding on the impact of ASEAN. As I said earlier, this will be first installed at the NAIA, so we are expecting it to be installed on August 25, so I hope you watch out for that. And another is an introduction to the Philippines. It's another exhibition that introduces the Philippines' cultural history to the traveling public. And we also have Budayao Festival. This is for the 2017 BIMP Iaga Festival on Culture and the Arts, which is an inaugural activity of the social, cultural, and education pillar of BIMP Iaga. The festival shall gather more than 300 to 500 contemporary artists and indigenous cultural masters in celebration of harmony in diversity.
For the benefit of our viewers, Marianne, what does BIMP Iaga mean?
BIMP Iaga is Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, East ASEAN growth area.
And what will be featured during the festival of the BIMP Iaga?
All sorts of the different arts. So we have dances, music, crafts, visual arts, performances.
Where's the venue of the festival?
In Sarangani province in Mindanao.
So folks in Sarangani will be able to watch the different presentations from BIMPIAGA member states.
Right.
So there will be performances from Brunei, Indonesia, and Malaysia.
As well as they will also feature their crafts, so traditional crafts. So master craftsmen from the 4 member countries will be coming in and converging in this area in September. This will be in September.
And the members, the exhibition you mentioned earlier, Marianne, at the airport, this is something that Filipinos or travelers can see while waiting for their plane.
Right,
Hopefully
right.
it's not late, but it's good if it's late. They can watch the.
They will learn more about ASEAN.
Are these paintings or pictures, photos, or are there videos?
These are actual materials that you will see, like what I said earlier, the traditional costumes or actual costumes and textiles. We also have tangible objects that will be displayed there, but hindi pwedeng hawakan, cannot be touched.
Including the Singaporean costume donated by the ambassador.
Yes, of course.
Will be displayed.
Yes, thank you, Ambassador.
All right. Do we have any questions from the audience? All right. So we've been talking about earlier what can Filipinos benefit from ASEAN. But let me ask you, Mary Ann, what has the Philippines contributed to ASEAN insofar as a social cultural exchange is concerned?
Well, let me just answer that through one example, like benefit.
Sure.
Like for myself as an artist, when I participated in the ASEAN Youth Camp, which is a flagship project of the ASEAN Committee on Culture and Information, I was able to network with artists, young artists from the different member states of ASEAN. And through this, I was able to see different opportunities that could be accessed in different countries. Like one fellow artist was able to produce a film or an album in Singapore because of that. He was a Filipino and then he transferred to Singapore because of the network that he created through this ASEAN Youth Camp. So there are better opportunities, or there are other opportunities that could be opened for fellow artists or cultural workers for that matter.
All right, thanks. We have somebody is asking here on Twitter, and I use the hashtag ASEAN 2017 Dialogues. Why do we have the ASEAN Quest mobile game available for iOS users only when most people in the region are on Android? So
that is beyond my core competencies. I will have to ask the ASEAN Secretariat for that.
but it's available right now on the App Store.
I think so, but it's on iPad, available only for iPad.
Okay, but if you have an iPad, you can go on the App Store and you search for the ASEAN Quest game. And you're supposed to, and that's the only game I think that should be endorsed by ASEAN to replace the Dota game that all of our children. That's all the time that we have right now, Ms. Marianne. Is there a website that Filipinos watching and other citizens of ASEAN member states can log into to know more about the other socio-cultural activities that we weren't able to present this afternoon?
Of course, we have the website of the PCO. Everything is there, the activities that we will be having for the 50th anniversary. So everything is centralized for this commemorative year. So all the information will be accessed through that website. And also, the different government agencies who are part of the pillars also have a list of the activities that they are going to be a part of.
All right, so for those of you who are not aware, that website is www.asean2017.ph. Again, it's www.asean2017.ph. Thank you very much, Marianne, for at least answering our social cultural questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Assistant Secretary Chris Ablan and Ms. Mary Ann Lewis, for the meaningful session. To our panel speakers, please stay on stage for a photo and hand over of the speaker certificates. Under Secretary Puyat, Assistant Secretary Kissinger Reyes, and Ms. Suyin Lee, please come to stage for the photos. Once again, may we request Assistant Secretary Chris Ablan and Ms. Mary Ann Lewis to come on stage for the photo and hand over of the speaker certificates. So that was our first panel, a primer on the ASEAN social-cultural pillar. And we're back for our second panel. The topic is integrating ASEAN into everyday life. May we call on our keynote speaker for this panel to the podium, Ambassador Delia Albert.
I'm not so sure if you can see me, but I think my voice should be loud enough to hear me. Well, good afternoon to everyone. I'm so happy to see a dear friend, our president of and dean of AIM, Ji Kyung Kang, the first woman to head AIM. May we welcome her. Perhaps we have something in common. I'm also the first woman foreign minister in Asia. So we're all in the spirit of ASEAN, Asia, and of course delighted to have Ambassador Li Peng, who is always there for the ASEAN affairs. You know why? She's going to chair ASEAN next year. So she knows exactly what she's not going to do. And of course, I'd like to greet our former Deputy Secretary General of ASEAN, Ambassador Villacorta, who was also the Philippine Permanent Representative to ASEAN. And of course, to all of you, I'm delighted to be here, listening to how ASEAN has moved through the years. I remember having joined the Department of Foreign Affairs in 1967, when ASEAN was born. So don't do your arithmetic. And I remember the days, the early days, when we would have very, very tedious, long meetings, and we were trying to listen how ASEAN is pronounced. And the 4 countries would say ASEAN. When it came to the Philippines, it was something else. So we said, oh, perhaps we meant something else. But anyway, I thought I would mention this because all through the years, the Philippines has always had 4 or 5 ways of pronouncing ASEAN. And I hope that after this third dialogue, we will join the other 600 million ASEAN people to pronounce it the way they do. I welcome and congratulate the organizers. I think the initiative is terrific of this series of dialogues on the 3 pillars of the ASEAN community: the political security community, the economic community, and the socio-cultural community. May I, at the outset, share with you what a former Secretary General of ASEAN, Rodolfo Severino, wrote very clearly in his book, ASEAN in Search of a Community. And one of the things he really emphasized is that the reason ASEAN was having difficulties getting the ASEAN political and security community accepted, as well as the ASEAN economic community respected by the private sector, is that there was very little known of ASEAN. And therefore, he believed that the most important and that the ASEAN socio-cultural community should have been the first pillar, and I agree with him. So let's think that this is the first pillar, and I agree with Secretary Judy and everybody else that this should have been the first pillar of ASEAN community. I understand that this is the last of a series, and I have been asked to comment on the overall theme of ASEAN identity by responding to 3 questions, covering 50 years of ASEAN in 10 minutes. Question number 1, how has ASEAN transformed in the last 50 years? Personally, I hesitate to use the word transformed and prefer to describe the evolving character of ASEAN as a work in progress. I suppose I will wait till 2020 when I can venture to comment on its transformation after it has achieved some of the imperative or the benchmarks which I consider are imperative in building the envisioned ASEAN community. As I said, in '67, I have been attending meetings of ASEAN for 50 years. I don't know how old I was then. But one of the things I really noted throughout these 50 years was the slow-moving decision-making process. I always say ASEAN is doing very well, but doing it very slowly, slowly, slowly. However, I must admit that generally ASEAN as an organization has succeeded in many aspects of community building. Among them, and first and foremost, on the political front, ASEAN has provided the public space to ensure peace and stability in the region. If you remember your history, this was such a troubled region. And I remember the meetings between the 4 or 5 foreign ministers, which part of which I organized, had some difficulties getting across each other because of existing overlapping claims. There was Sabah, there was southern Thailand, there were problems between Malaysia and Indonesia. So it was rather a difficult time. However, I believe that the founding fathers of ASEAN were very, very serious that we either make it through the ASEAN or maybe wither. Remember that there were 2 earlier attempts to make regional cooperation feasible. One was Association of Southeast Asia, which only had 3 countries, and the Mafilindo, which also had only 3 countries. So when the 5 foreign ministers decided to play golf is a very sacred activity in ASEAN. That's where major decisions are made, by the way, when nobody else is listening. And I think that the crucial golf game in Bangsaen, Thailand, in '67, gave them the decision to move forward and really give up some of their reservations and build ASEAN. It also, as I said, moved very slowly. It took 25 years before ASEAN could use the word integration. I remember being DG of ASEAN at that time. We were always corrected that if you use the word integration, you're giving up some of your sovereignty. However, there was a lot of outside pressures like the Fortress Europe, NAFTA, which pushed the leaders to say, hey, we better integrate or again, perhaps get swallowed by these big guys. So in Singapore, I remember clearly how we managed to use the word integration for the first time when we agreed to the ASEAN Free Trade Area. Institutionally, ASEAN has achieved this vision to include the 10 geographically linked Southeast Asian countries, and it also developed a number of dialogue partners. Thirdly, and legally, it has attained a juridical personality. This was also very difficult to reach because getting a juridical personality means you can be sued, but then you can also sue. So this was a compromise made, and the charter took us quite a bit of time to get together and agree. And that would need a whole series of discussions to know what's in that charter. In short, I remember a Malaysian think tank saying that to remember the achievements of ASEAN, remember 3 C's. It has achieved a charter, it has achieved or is achieving a community, and the third, which is very important and it's ongoing, is its connectivity. I think connectivity is going to make a very big change in the whole concept of ASEAN when we are physically linked together. Question number 2, what is ASEAN identity and why is it important? Perhaps one can raise the question, is there an ASEAN identity? Social scientists differentiate 2 nuances of ASEAN identity, namely institutional identity and second, a communal identity. An ASEAN institutional identity includes ASEAN institutions such as the ASEAN Secretariat, and of course the ASEAN Secretariats in each of the countries, ASEAN summits, ASEAN committees, its working groups, as well as the other affiliated groups which meet ever so often. I understand that there are more than 1,000 ASEAN-related meetings every year. So this is, to me, I wrote an article on ASEAN. It's like weaving a tapestry. The more you meet, the closer you get, and the more colorful you become, and perhaps the richer the whole tapestry becomes. Last Saturday, the ambassador and I were in Los Baños to inaugurate a terrific building of the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity. I was very happy to be there because I was the grandmother of this project. I introduced it in 1992 because I felt that the Philippines, as a mega diverse country, has a lot to offer in terms of its studies, its people, and its interest in conserving and preserving the environment. And I'm very happy that climate change has come into the mega trend, which makes it a very popular project, and luckily we were able to get quite a bit of support. I encourage you to see this center. It's one of the most important ASEAN projects, and to think that the Philippines is a center of excellence for biodiversity is something to be proud of. Throughout 4 decades of my diplomatic career, I have participated in each level of institutional activity of ASEAN, from working groups to ministerial meetings and even summits. Even when posted overseas, we could not escape our third country committees of ASEAN diplomatic representations. Certainly, ASEAN institutional identity has expanded tremendously, as contained in its blueprints and action plans under each of the 3 pillars of the ASEAN community. The building of the ASEAN communal identity consists of the conscious and deliberate promotion of initiatives, processes, and especially sentiments of the so-called, quote, we feeling, or ours feeling, and especially the we are in this together feeling. I think it will take a little bit of time before we can really reach those feelings. Perhaps some of you already feel it, but think of the general public when we say we have achieved this. I believe that in order to move and build that ASEAN community, ASEAN identity has to move beyond its institutional perspectives towards a deeper sense of ASEAN commonality, interconnectedness, belongingness, if there's such a word, and even a shared identity. This means greater engagement, as our Secretary Tagiwalo said, a greater engagement of the people and a sense of ownership of the ASEAN initiatives based on greater awareness of ASEAN. Question number 3. What can the government do in order to fully integrate ASEAN into our lives? I have only one answer. Implement our commitments. We have been committing so much for the past 50 years. And if you monitor, have we really done it? Have we made textbooks on ASEAN? Have we made our educational curriculum regionally oriented? Have we made, there's a whole list of them, and I'm prepared to give you a wonderful official list. I cannot do it in 10 minutes. Anyway, for a founding member of ASEAN, it is unfortunate that the Philippines ranks very low in the level of awareness of ASEAN. This is revealed in 3 regional surveys made in 2004, 2007, and 2012. The latest survey, taken in 2012, among capital cities of ASEAN, revealed that 76% of the city people in ASEAN lack a basic understanding of ASEAN. 81% is only familiar with the name ASEAN, and 19% have never heard about ASEAN. So I think you're all very fortunate today that you're participating in this effort, and I commend the Office of, is my brother in fraternity? For your initiative to bring this to the public. Well, this low level of awareness may be attributed to the practice that ASEAN has been mainly a government-led organization, and people has been largely those in government agencies or similarly related institutions. To my mind, the challenge for ASEAN for the next 50 years would be to enhance people's participation and develop a sense of ownership of ASEAN and its initiatives. ASEAN and its member states should communicate more with the public by developing a stronger culture of consultation, collaboration, and engagement with the general public. A list, as I said, is available. We have made a list. The AREA is a think tank of Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia, has made a list of all these commitments that we have made, which we really have to be implementing. I can give you a copy at the end. For my part, I'd like to take this opportunity, and this is a commercial, to inform you that a private sector-led initiative, the ASEAN Society of the Philippines, not Asia Society of Suyin. We're not competing with you, Suyin. This is strictly ASEAN Society, was recently launched by Chairman Emeritus, former President Fidel Ramos, the son of one of the founding fathers of ASEAN, Secretary Narciso Ramos. In a nutshell, the concept behind organizing the ASEAN Society reads as follows. The ASEAN Society Philippines is a civil society organization. It aims to link the ASEAN economic community, the ASEAN political security community, and the ASEAN socio-cultural community into a discussion that bridges societies among sectors to work together toward greater awareness and education about ASEAN as a region of growth and opportunity for all. It likewise caters to a wider audience base through institutional and grassroots exchanges in order to create synergistic solutions that promote greater understanding through cultures, traditions, and values of ASEAN member countries. The concept paper goes on, but if you're interested, we would be very happy to welcome you if you are keen to understand and perhaps, hopefully, appreciate what ASEAN means to all of us. The ASEAN Society rests on 3 pillars. It is a repository of information on ASEAN, information dissemination, and active connection. I have just collected all the works of thought leaders of ASEAN from 1967 from the PIDS, the Philippine Institute for Development Studies of UP. The UP Law Center has had a fantastic collection of analysis, including an analysis of 30 Years of ASEAN book by Chief Justice Sereno. Have you ever heard of that? Perhaps join the ASEAN Society and we'll show you all these fantastic thought leaders and their contribution to the development and appreciation of ASEAN in the Philippines. After all, we are a founding member, and we hope that we could raise the level of awareness of ASEAN in the Philippines. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you for the message, Ambassador Delia Albert. Please stay on stage for a photo and handover of the certificate in token of appreciation. We would like to request on stage Undersecretary Puyat, Assistant Secretary Kissinger Reyes, and Ms. Suyin Lee, together with Dr. Jik Yong Kang, the President of Asian Institute of Management, to award the certificates. Once again, thank you so much, Ambassador Delia Albert. We would like to request Ms. Winwin Ong and Mr. Norberto Ong to come up on stage and speak from their seats. We'll be giving everyone blank index cards for questions after every speaker. Please write your name and affiliation, then hand it to our ushers so we may share them with the moderator during our open forum. We'd also like to invite our moderator, Assistant Secretary Chris Ablan, to moderate the panel. We would also like to invite Ms. Mikey Cojuangco to be on stage to join the panel.
All right, so I'm back. Welcome, Win-Win, Norberto, and Miss Mikey. So this is panel 2. And panel 2 is on ASEAN identity, as mentioned and discussed briefly by Ambassador Albert. And we have our panelists this afternoon, and I'll be asking some questions. Again, if you have any questions, you can just approach any of our ushers in the room here at the Asian Institute of Management and ask away, and I'll try to ask from our 3 panelists. Likewise, if you're watching live on Facebook on ASEAN 2017, you can also post your questions over there. And if you're on Twitter, use the hashtag ASEAN 2017 Dialogues. All right, so to start things, let's ask Mr. and Mrs. Ong, and just for the benefit of everyone, can you share what countries do you come from? Are you both from the Philippines?
Well, by blood, I'm pure Burmese, or from Myanmar.
Myanmar.
Yes, but it's hard to say which country I come from because the Philippines has been my home. I'm so Pinay na Pinay.
Okay.
And I love the Philippines. But, you know, I would say, in a sense, I'm third culture or multicultural. Because I left Myanmar when I was, before I turned 3.
Right.
I grew up in Europe, and then I moved here since I was a teenager. And my husband and I we met when we were 20 years old. So we've been together for 40 years. We have 2 kids, and we have 3 grandsons.
Wow.
All Pinoys, very strong Pinoys. So.
Mr. Ong is a Filipino.
Yes.
By blood, I'm pure Pinoy.
Yes.
But my spirit is in Myanmar, and I'm very, very happy. I'm an equity investor now in Myanmar.
Oh.
I invite our Philippine companies to explore Myanmar. Way back in the 80s, nobody ever even thought about Myanmar.
Yes.
Where's Myanmar? You know, who knew about Myanmar? It was called Burma then.
Yes.
And I'm very fortunate that I'm married to Burmese, Myanmar. And I'm now 50.
Why the marriage works, right?
We're 50. I'm 50% here in the Philippines, 50% in Myanmar, and And yes, I'm pure Pinoy.
So you spend half of the year in Burma or in Myanmar and half year in the Philippines.
Well, not half half the month, half a month. Every month I go in and out.
My Pinoy husband is based in Myanmar most of the time, and his Myanmar wife is based in Manila most of the time.
That's integration.
is.
It didn't take us 25 years.
Exactly.
As citizens of ASEAN or ASEAN member states, do the cultural values you hold complement or cause friction with each other? Because maybe we have lots of Filipinos out there who are thinking of having a Malaysian girlfriend or having a Thai boyfriend or lady boy. I'm sorry, not lady boy. Sorry, but do your cultural values clash or complement with each other?
Actually, we were talking outside earlier with our next speaker, with Dita, and we were talking about the fact that, the thing that the Myanmar or Burmese have very much in common with the Filipinos is a sense of humor. And there is a very marked sense of humor. I mean, the Burmese were known way back in the early 1920s and 30s. In one book, we were described as the Irish of the East. And Pinoys have an incredible sense of humor. So I think if you look at the things that bind even the entire ASEAN region, I mean, it's a love of family, complete respect for elders. It's the way we approach things, the sense of humor. The Bayanihan spirit is very much alive in our two cultures. So, of course, as Ambassador Albert said, everything in life is a work in progress.
Right.
And then earlier, Undersecretary Puyat said, working together, staying together, right? So the commonalities are the ones that I think work in our favor and the commitment.
From my take on that, actually the Myanmar side, they have a stronger, deeper sense of respect as far as elders are concerned. Of course, we also do that as far as Filipinos are concerned. But I noticed in Myanmar, the hierarchy is different. Their number one, in terms of who they respect most, is the monk. Second would be the parents. And the third would be, would you believe, their mentors, professors, teachers, which is completely different from us, in the Philippines. I think, from my own opinion, I think the hierarchy is, from the Philippine point of view, is parents and maybe equally your spiritual advisor or but I don't know if the mentors come in the count, But in addition to that, the respect is very real in Myanmar up till today. Even me, my staff, there are some events in Myanmar where they pay respects to their elders. They'll literally go in front of you. They'll bow and pay respects and say, we're thankful for being here and for being employed by you. So this is just fantastic.
It's very much like Christmas here, where you have Mano, which is such a nice tradition. We have a weekend house in Batangas, and our caretaker is much older than us, but we call them Nanay and Tatay, and we do Mano to them. So I think it's actually more similar than you think, the respect
This is
for
defending
elders.
the Pinoys now.
So the long and short of it is that the different cultures are able to blend with each other and complement with each other.
Yes. I think it's always in any relationship, whether you're talking about the region or whether you're talking about a personal relationship or a professional relationship, it's always a matter of having similar goals. It's always a matter of dialogue. I think a strong relationship is impossible if everything is unilateral. It has to be bilateral. It has to be a sense of ownership and stakeholdership in both ends of the relationship, and I think that's the only way things work.
Thanks, Win. I didn't know about that. That Burma and the Philippines share those things in those values, and so for those of you who are looking for the love life, you can put Myanmar in your option list.
Except remember, he, as a Pinoy, they're very romantic. So back in the days when we were young, he was courting me.
Yes.
So I think if you remember that, I mean, he came with his parents for the pamanhikan.
Yes.
You know, I mean, these are wonderful cultural traditions, which I love. So I think if you're thinking of multicultural romantic relationships, I think you should keep those wonderful cultural traditions here alive, because Burmese are not romantic.
Oh, they're not.
No, not at all. At all.
But I think, yeah, I would recommend for the Filipinos to really expand. You know, we're unique as I would say Filipinos are unique in the region because we are a derivative Asian. If you ask a Thai, would you like to go to Canada? They say, why? You ask a Pinoy, since birth. You know, I mean, we're not limited. We don't feel limited to staying in one place.
Yes.
So, and also the Filipinos tend to merge and meld into the situation where they are. So I would recommend the Filipinos to expand their relationship by, you know,
It's
getting
true.
married to Laotians or Burmese
Yes. And not
or
just limited.
Vietnamese.
Not just limited to go to Europe or the US
Yes.
and Canada. Stay
ASEAN.
here in the region.
Stay within ASEAN.
Yes.
I think really it's the ties that bind. I love the ASEAN symbol.
Yes.
Because, you know, you see all the strands and threads, and I mean, if you look at the metaphor of fabric, because textiles are so important to the ASEAN region, the ties that bind are very important. You have the individual threads, but if you know the pattern you want to weave, if you know the design you want to have take shape, you know, it's just a matter really of cooperating to
Yes.
build a very, very strong fabric
Yes.
for society. So.
Thanks, Win. I have another question, but I'll get back to you on that. Let's now move on to Mikey Cojuangco, who is a member of the International Olympic Committee and in the past, of course, has participated in the Southeast Asian Games, aside from the Olympics, of course. So, Mikey, how has ASEAN integration or ASEAN integration affected your life or career as an athlete?
Well, first, hi, everybody. I think I should mention, just out of respect also for those who have actually gone to the Olympics, I competed in the Asian Games and the Southeast Asian Games, but I'm not actually an Olympian, and it's really difficult to get there. So I think it's good if I say that out of respect to fellow athletes. But as far as competing in the Southeast Asian Games, I competed in my first SEA Games in 1995 and my second in 2005. And I have to say that because of the proximity of the Southeast Asian countries, it made it a lot easier for us as Filipino athletes to make the Southeast Asian Games a goal. There's really not a qualifying procedure to compete in the Southeast Asian Games, whereas in the Asian Games, or most especially the Olympics, there is a way to qualify for it. So you have to reach a minimum amount of standard and level to be able to compete there. In a lot of ways, it's also for reasons of safety and to make sure that you're competing at a standard that if you win, you can be really proud of it. And it was a stepping stone also for greater things for the South, to use the Southeast Asian Games for the Asian Games and onwards. But I have to say that being able to compete in the Southeast Asian Games didn't just mean going there at the time of the SEA Games. We had to compete in a local circuit where we met the people we were competing against. We were able to see their countries, their cultures, especially because we started at this region at a younger age. Most of us were minors who had our parents traveling with us as well. And I feel really blessed because my mother, who is a historian, is also a great fan of experiencing different cultures. So any place we went to for the first time, she made sure she came with us. Although hindi ko po siya nakita kahit minsan during the times that we were training for competition, which was good because I realized that every time my mom or dad would watch me, I would fall off. So it was better na hindi ko po sila nakikita. But on the last day of competition, I would always see her in the stands. I don't know where she went. I don't know what she did. But of course, nag-sightseeing na siya. And what she would do was ask the parents of my teammates to allow all of us to stay an extra day so we could go see the sights and spend time with the people we had met at the competition. And she would make it a point for us to see their public market. And if we didn't really have that purpose as athletes, representing our nation to be able to travel to those different countries, we wouldn't get the opportunity to be exposed like that. So it was really a learning experience for us, and we didn't realize how well we knew. It became very natural for us how to get along with our other counterparts in the different countries because we simply spent time together doing sports, something that bound us. So even if we were competing against each other, we were friends behind the scenes. And having developed also a circuit in Southeast Asia, whenever we would compete in the Asian Games or whenever you see a Southeast Asian athlete competing at the Olympics or any other games, we always cheer for each other. And it just became natural for us to do that.
Are you still in contact with the athletes that you competed against in 95 and 2005?
Yes, I am. And a lot of them are also sports leaders in their own countries now. A lot of them are still competing. A lot older and younger are doing all different things now, but we're still friends. And even, that said, it has opened business opportunities for us also. So we take advantage of that network that we were able to build as athletes.
All right. We don't have a lot of time, but I'll ask this last question for both Mr. and Mrs. Ong and Mikey. When it comes to family, how confident are you on the future that the children of this generation would have, especially with the regional partnerships here in ASEAN that we are pursuing? So how confident are you, that your children will, to what extent are you confident of the regional partnerships we are getting into for Mikey and Mr. and Mrs. Ong?
Well, if I have to look at it on the side of an athlete, or at this point now as a leader in sports, I would have to say that I definitely see the necessity of strengthening the relationships within the region because we can grow together. I think that holds true for any field that you're in or any aspect. But as far as sports is concerned, I think it's a very good gauge for us to see our neighbors, what they've achieved, what they've done. When we as athletes go to different countries, we act as ambassadors of our country. And it becomes equally important for us to go there, behave well, perform well. Everybody is concerned about medals. Yes, that's true. But at the end of the day, what's more important is what made you good enough to win that medal. What in your personality has made you a winner? You can't just go to another country as you are. You work every day. You hone your skill every day. Talent is not enough. Puso is not enough. There's no winner in this world that relies only on heart. Every athlete you see that wants to win, they all have heart. So everyone really has an attitude of excellence, of respect, and we enjoy what we do because we are able to develop friendships. And to see how our counterparts in the region have advanced both with infrastructure, both with what they invest in sports, because investing in sports is not investing in medals. Investing in sports is investing in the youth. It's investing in an attitude. It's investing in a way of life. And to take people away from the perils in society that we see. We give people a reason to have healthier bodies. And in other countries, you have their departments of sports linked with the Department of Health. Because when you have healthier citizens, then the government spends less on healthcare. You have Japan, well, it's not Southeast Asian, but we can learn from them as well, that has their sports linked to their Department of Science and Technology because they are employing scientific means to sporting success. And all over the world, you can see that the results in sports competitions is a reflection of the economy of that country. So we talk about sports as one of the ways in which to strengthen the region, but us in Southeast Asia, we also look at each other and want to see each other move up in the world of sports. But this is me, this is my world, and this is where I've been put, so I can just do my part where God has placed me.
I don't know how you can top that. Mr. and Mrs. Ong, can you add anything?
I think, well, because the time is very short, but I think maybe just speaking from purely just the personal level.
Yes.
Maybe as, someone watching our grandsons grow up, I mean, we're very grateful that the ASEAN region is so developed and social media is what it is. And, earlier the first speaker had talked about the ability of budget airlines. So you have the ability, whether from high-end travel to budget airways, the next generation and the third generation and the generation after, the ability for them to interconnect is exponential, and it's going at warp speed, because Myanmar, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, it was extremely expensive to buy one SIM card. It used to cost $10,000 to get, many years ago, to get a license. You had to have a bond and you were checked. There was a military intelligence check. Now a SIM card is $1. Myanmar is 4G throughout the country. So what has happened, if you look at it, even people from small villages are now constantly connected. From the northern borders in Yunnan, you have cheap Chinese phones come in. Everybody from the smallest village in the snow-clad mountains in the Tibetan plateau of the Chin and Kachin states down to the south are interconnected. So what more our children, our grandchildren, and the future generations? So I think there is great potential for the ASEAN.
So I think it's safe to say that all three of you agree that you're all confident of the future of our children and our children's children.
Yes, I am. I really am.
I hate to break our conversation, but that's it for this panel. Let's give a big hand to our three panelists.
Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Ong, Ms. Mikey Cojuangco, and to our moderator, Assistant Secretary Chris Ablan. We will be having a 3-minute stretch break after the awarding of the certificates. And for our speakers and moderator, please stay on stage for the handover of the speakers' certificates. We would like to request on stage Assistant Secretary Kissinger Reyes and Ms. Suyin Liu Lee to award the tokens of appreciation and the certificates. Once again, thank you to our panel speakers and our moderator. We will be having a 2-minute stretch break, so we will resume in 2 minutes.
With all against our spells and misery.
Now we're standing. May we request all the speakers to please come on stage for a family photo. May we now request the Assistant Secretaries and of the PCOO to join them for a photo op together with Ms. Suyin Lee of Asia Society Philippines. To our participants, please settle down because we're starting in a minute. Thank you. Once again, you would like to request all the speakers to come on stage for another official photo. Once again, may we request all the speakers to come on stage for another official photo of the panel speakers, the moderator, and the official of the VIPs as well. To our participants, please settle down as you will be starting shortly. To our participants, please settle down as we will begin shortly. Everyone, please take a seat as we will be starting in a few moments. Once again, may I request everyone to please settle down as we will begin or resume the forum shortly.
Thank you so much, Secretary Sabasa.
We're now back for our third panel titled Education and Career Excellence. May we first call on stage Mr. Zach Yuzon. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give him a round of applause. May we also call on stage Ms. Dida Pama. Once again, please fill your index cards for questions. And also, today's hashtag is hashtag ASEAN 2017 Dialogues.
Alright, so we're back. Parang na-starstruck yata yung mga tao kanina nakipag-picture na kay Mikey Cojuangco. Alright. Pagkatapos kunin yung picture with Mikey Cojuangco, nagsi-alisan na. So, hindi, medyan pa naman. Just for the benefit of those watching online, we're very appreciative that through the help of Asia Society, we're able to invite our guests from academe and from civil society, as well as other representatives from government agencies. So that's the makeup of our audience here. Online, you have a variety of people viewing. Some are citizens of ASEAN member states, while others are Filipinos from all over the world who are interested to know about the third pillar, or the people's pillar, as mentioned by Secretary Taguiwalo. So this is our third panel, and any questions, even for panel 1 and panel 2, let's ask from these two panelists, regardless if they know the answer or not. No, I'm just kidding. All right, so our panelists for this afternoon are products of ASEAN universities, from the National University of Singapore, or specifically the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, that's Zach Yuzon, and the Asian Institute of Technology, Dida Pama. So let's all welcome both Dida and Zach. All right, so we want to know because Zach and Dida, if you speak to a Filipino, graduate student or someone who'd like to take further studies abroad, we won't really think about taking, our masters in NUS or in AIT. Filipinos dream of taking their masters in the US or in Europe, some in Australia, but not really, kasi mga Pinoy gusto nila malayo eh. And for this panel, we'd like to know what is the contribution of studying in an ASEAN tertiary institution compared to going abroad. And maybe at the end, we conclude that sometimes it's better to do our studies here, because sometimes you can't. Well, I'm answering my own question. Let's sorry. Let's ask Zach what he has to say.
Hello. Yes. So, I guess by way of my experience, I think I would be typical Pinoy in that when I was growing up, my first instinct was to study, to get higher studies abroad. Not only because maybe one of my parents studied abroad, or my grandmother studied abroad, but because that's what was uso. That was what Filipinos my age, and I was born, borderline millennial, talked about, even in high school, even in college. And so it came as a surprise to me as well when I realized that studying abroad didn't necessarily mean studying in Western institutions abroad.
Yes.
Abroad could be anywhere outside of the Philippines. Actually, even studying abroad outside of Metro Manila could be considered abroad for some people. And my decision came about, I think, two things, if I may just quickly go the background of myself. I wanted to be a diplomat, sort of like a James Bond type, 007, agent, when I was younger. And then I did a volunteer year as a teacher in Tawi-Tawi, which was on an island that was closer to Malaysia than it was to mainland Mindanao.
Yes.
And the signal there, so close to Malaysia that the signal there was Malaysian, the TV stations were Malaysian. And yet, in the afternoon, they would watch Pangako Sa'yo. And it was subtitled in Bahasa. And that's when I realized that, being a part of the Philippines didn't necessarily mean just being in the Philippines. The borders are so fluid, as we know, in Mindanao. And that also means that we're now, linked, or we were actually very much linked. Historically, we could go anywhere we wanted to, and still now Filipinos go anywhere they want to. And so that opened up my world. And I think when I realized that, here are now good opportunities to study in the region, we as Filipinos shouldn't be afraid to take it. And thankfully I can say that that was probably one of the best decisions of my life. Not only because, of course, I was lucky enough to get a scholarship, but because I met so many people who thought the same way, that this region is the region to be in. In fact, one of the unofficial mottos of our school was that Asia is rising, or Asia is risen. And so the question now is, if Asia is rising, what are we going to do to make sure that it rises in a sustainable and in a peaceful manner, and avoid the pitfalls and the mistakes that so many of our neighbors or other countries or other regions suffered in the past. So this is, I guess, the challenge that I present, in that Filipinos, of course, are global. We can be anywhere. We were discussing this earlier. You can go to a cruise ship and you'll find majority of the crew is Filipino. But the question is, are Filipinos really thinking globally? Do we really think about how we can learn from the rest of the world that we can take back not only to the Philippines, but to the region that we belong to? And I'm thankful that there are many people here who are supportive of that. Ambassador Belen, I met in Singapore, and she actually welcomed us, and she inspired us to really focus on the region and on the Philippines. So that's my story.
And you're still friends with a lot of your classmates from postgrad.
Yes, and in fact, the interesting thing was that majority of the people in my postgrad class were not from Southeast Asia. So they came from as far as Ireland. Of course, India and China were one of the bigger numbers. And it's interesting that they really wanted to learn what Southeast Asia was doing right.
All right. Dida, so we know that the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy is in Singapore. The Asian Institute of Technology is where?
Is in Bangkok, Thailand.
In Thailand?
Yes.
I see. Okay.
So I chose the AIT for 3 reasons.
Right.
Number one, I wanted to stay in Asia. It was rising. I grew up in the 70s in Asia, in the 70s and 80s when investment was pouring into Asia. So if it was emerging, I wanted to stay and learn and immerse here. Number two, I am in telecoms. I am a marketeer in a telecoms firm. When I looked, there's a school in France that does a telecoms curriculum, but when I read it, I kind of already knew it because I was already doing all the work that would train me to do whatever it was they were going to teach me to do. So I felt that the curriculum wasn't really going to prepare me to be a senior executive. The curriculum in AIT prepared me for sustainability, and they wove sustainability into each and every course. They start you off with presentation skills, so my presentation skills went to a completely different level the minute I went for my EMBA. And the third is a very personal reason. I was born and raised in Thailand to Filipino parents, and my father was administrator of the Asian Institute of Technology.
I see.
So it was a school that was very close to my heart. I grew up running around on the grounds. So it didn't mean that I got to enter without having to go through the process. But I mean, if you wanted to talk about emotions and knowledge of the place, AIT would have been it.
One hesitancy of Filipinos to study here, or at least in the region, would be the language barrier. In AIT is the medium of instruction
Completely
Thai
in English.
and English.
But even if it was in Thai, that would not be a problem for me. I was born there, so I understand it. But AIT is an international organization. The people that started it, the people that teach there are all PhDs, and English is a requirement, so that was not a problem. I had, all my professors were European.
Right. As alumni of these institutions, what can you say about harmonization and integration as regards to Philippine universities? You have any opinion on that? Is there any struggle, problem with integration amongst universities in the ASEAN region?
Well, I mean, now the biggest concern among universities in the Philippines is how to adjust their schedule so that it aligns closely with the rest. I mean, ASEAN, of course, but the rest of the world. And scheduling aside, we know, and let's face it, our educational facilities, our institutions are not the best in the region or in the world. And yet, Filipinos are still very competitive. In fact, when we were in Singapore, we were known as the Filipino Mafia, and we basically dominated all the awards, humble brag. But imagine what we could have done if we actually had better facilities, we actually had exchange programs that really exposed Filipino students, not just from the top universities, but from the universities in the provinces, to curriculum that would be challenging, not rote memorization, that would actually develop critical thinking skills, because that's actually one of the, I would say that's one of the missing elements of our education system, that we need to have a critical thinking curriculum so that Filipinos, when they go abroad, they can easily hack anything, But critical thinking, you need to develop that earlier on.
For me, well, I went to an international school, so speaking English comes naturally, and you're trained that way. I do remember when, in the 80s, Filipinos really were comfortable speaking English. But I find that those that came, well, after me, they're not comfortable speaking English. They always say stuff like, mauubusan ako, nosebleed. When we're known outside as the country with people that love to speak English and naturally will understand you, that expats, and when they come here, you don't have to adjust. Your staff will speak English. So I really encourage the confidence and just the bravery to just speak English and not have to worry about nosebleed, and write English, watch English programs as much as you can so that you're comfortable with it. Abroad, they pay tutors, Filipino tutors, to speak conversational English, something that comes so naturally for us. So please be proud of that.
Now, there's a debate, of course. And we'd like to know from your perspective from Singapore and from Thailand. There's a debate between what do we promote? Do we promote our Filipino language and abandon teaching English in schools? What is your experience from studying in Singapore and in Thailand? Did they abandon teaching Thai, or did they teach both Thai and English? What are your thoughts on that?
I don't have it. Okay, in Thailand, what I see now is the rise of bilingual schools.
Right.
There is no need to abandon one language for the other. Both of them can go together. Your national identity is naturally tied to your language, but to be competitive, you also have to learn English.
So, I mean, you don't have. So when we embrace Filipino, we don't have to abandon English. So our educators have to emphasize teaching both in Filipino and in English, because if we abandon English, we'll be losing our competitive advantage.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
That is my personal opinion.
Now, Zach talked about trying to put our schedules the same as with regard to other member states. And related to that is K to 12. And here in the Philippines, K to 12 was K to 12, and do you feel that K to 12 is a step towards to integrating with other member states? Is that the correct step towards to?
I mean, of course, there are debates and discussions on this, but in general, I believe it's the right step. I think having a K-12 curriculum not only prepares graduates, and makes them more competitive internationally, and just in general, I think the idea, the principle behind it, that by graduating from the K-12 program, you are competent enough, number one, for employment, and then to be able to study not abroad, but in higher educational
But let
institutions.
me cut to you. Based on our facial features, we are not under the K-12. Did you
yes.
have any Did you have any problems when you applied for your university for postgrad? Did they question, well, the Philippines, you're not into K-12, so we have to test your English, we have to test you. Did you encounter any challenges pre-K-12, meaning for our generation?
I guess, to be frank, I had to learn math again and statistics. So I think more than K-12, it's really a focus on science, technology, and mathematics that Filipinos tend to lag in general with regards to the rest of the region and the world.
Right. But K-12 is already going to that direction,
I hope-
focusing
yes,
on those
exactly,
basics. Dida?
I have, from what I vicariously pick up from home, from what I understand, and my father is in the audience, so maybe you can correct me. From what I understand about K to 12, it's a matter of lacking of units and the number of years that you are being educated. And that's the reason why they propose that we educate our children for 12 years, so that by the time that you go off to college, you should have been formally educated for at least 12 years. Before, we were only formally educated for 10 years, which also corresponds to a lack of credits. Am I right?
Yes. Are you based here in the Philippines now, Dida, or are you back in Thailand?
Yes. I have a migratory job, so throughout my career, I've been in and out, in and out.
So you do have some work in Thailand.
I've worked in Thailand, I've worked in Indonesia, I spent some time in Japan.
How about you, Zach?
Currently based here, yes.
Let's move on from education to career. Working with workers that come from the ASEAN region, are there any tips for Filipinos who are thinking of working in Thailand, working in Malaysia? Are there any cultural barriers?
Oh, I had a whole presentation prepared for that, for tips and tricks on
maybe
working abroad. Number one, it's cultural sensitivity is what will determine your success as an expat, not your corporate performance record. You are hired for aptitude, fired for attitude, and cultural sensitivity plays a big part in that. In ASEAN, there is one thing among us Asian nations. We are passive-aggressive as a people. All 600 million of us, we're all passive-aggressive. Your non-verbals will say more than verbals. So when you go abroad, you really need to conduct yourself in a certain way. You need to say the right things so that you don't insult them without being even conscious of it. For example, in Indonesia, their left hand is the bad hand. No matter how you explain that I'm left-handed, I might hand things to you with my left hand. You don't do that. You transfer everything from documents to your name card to your right hand, and then you hand it. If you can, that's the number one thing. Hand your name card with both hands. You address them by the honorific. Seniors mean something. You always follow a senior person into the room. Learn the please and the thank yous and the hellos and the goodbyes, and you should be on your way. Especially learn to say thank you in the local language. Learn to say please in the local language. That's the first thing I can give you as a tip.
Actually, when foreigners come here in the Philippines and they try to use Filipino and saying please and thank you, you do appreciate it, right?
Yes, you do. And you watch their eyes light up when you say, oh, you bothered to learn.
Yes. So it's the same way in regions. And I think that's one takeaway also in working or studying here in the ASEAN region. Our culture and our values that we grew up with are maintained. Because if you go to Europe and Australia, where they don't really give much respect to elders and they treat them, it's very different. And there's some kind of culture change, whereas here in the ASEAN region, more or less, we share the same kinds of values. Like Myanmar, I just learned, we share the same values. Indonesia and Thailand, they respect their elders, so at least we share that particular value. Yes, Zach?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that we do share a lot of values, but at the same time, we also have a lot of differentiators that also make what this region is interesting. So as much as we also want to highlight, we're all part of the same region, we all have the same sort of values, I think it's also important to acknowledge the differences in each culture, because that's what creates that diverse tapestry that makes us unique among all the other regions in the world.
Is there any website or, if for potential workers going to any of the ASEAN member states, do they have a website that they can go to?
I would recommend that if your country, if your company is about to assign you abroad, to any ASEAN member country especially, to request for cultural sensitivity training. For example, if you go to Thailand, you need to know the do's and don'ts about how to deal with the Thai monarchy. That you don't just point at their pictures. You don't as a lady, you can't brush against a monk. You have to stay away. These are things that you will not know just because you're going abroad. You really need to have somebody explain this to you. So I do believe that some training companies provide this kind of training, cultural sensitivity.
But you know what, I don't think we have to reach to a company level. I think in the education level, there should be some class already on cultural sensitivity. If we are really for ASEAN integration, why wait until you want to be an employee?
That's a good point. That's a good point. Actually, to weave it into a social studies class in school about the different norms, customs and norms of each ASEAN member country. I think that's a very good point.
I actually didn't know you're not supposed to use your left hand in Indonesia.
I was told that. And I learned it the hard way. I'm left-handed. The first time I ever did it, I saw the face of the person that was receiving it from me. I had to quickly transfer my name card to both hands, and I said, I'm sorry. And they were okay with it.
All right. Are there any questions from the, because I hate to be the only one asking all these questions. But luckily it's time's up already. But I learned a lot from the 10 minutes we spoke to Zach and Dida, and we're really, really appreciative. Let's give a big, big hand to Mr. Yuson.
Thank you.
And Ms. Pama.
Thank you to our panel speakers, Mr. Yuzin and Ms. Pama, as well as to our moderator, Assistant Secretary Chris Ablan. Please stay on stage for the handover of the certificates of appreciation and a photo op. May we request on stage Assistant Secretary Kissinger Reyes and Ms. Suyin Lee to hand over the certificate and to have a photo with them. Once again, thank you to our panel speakers and moderator for the third panel on education and career excellence. Now, to give us a synthesis and closing off the session, may we invite Dr. Jamila Francisco from the Asian Institute of Management. Before he speaks, we would like to invite you all to participate in the ASEAN 50th anniversary on August 8, a celebration of 50 years of one community with a shared identity. Check the website www.asean2017.ph for more information. Professor Francisco, you have the floor.
All right. Hi. When they asked me to do the closing remarks, I asked why you want the professor to do the closing remarks. And the executive director of the Asia Society said, well, because he wanted a very brief and succinct synthesis. And I said, that's the worst idea, because the professor will probably just keep speaking here and lecture for the next 15 minutes. But luckily for you, I live in Quezon City, so I feel the pain. No? Having said that, I am going to lecture for 2 minutes or so. Here at AIM, we teach a course called Asian Business Systems, which I guess we also have to update to ASEAN Business Systems, right? But the whole point of that subject, of that course was, well, we thought that there are things which are done, or the things that certain things are done in Asia aren't necessarily the same way that they are done elsewhere. This is not my work. This is the work of 2 other geeks, Witt and Redding, right? Maybe, I don't know if you had this in your social sciences classes or whatever. But Witt and Redding note 4 particular differences or categories where Asian business systems operate differently from in the West, whatever the West means, Europe, America, so forth and so on. And the 4 are social capital, culture, are you writing it down? Informality, and multiplexity. Now, social capital, when you say social capital, the bedrock of social capital is this thing called trust. In the West, they say that the most important and prevalent kind of trust is institutional trust, whereby people simply trust that things will work out the way they should, because if they don't, I can go to the courts. If they don't, the law protects me. If they don't, regulatory bodies and policies will protect me. And therefore, I can just trust anyone, because even if I don't trust anyone, what I do trust is the system. The system will work, right? I can meet an employer, I can meet an exporter, an importer. Even if I haven't met them before, I can do business with them, because if it doesn't work, well, somebody's going to make sure that things are fixed. In Asia, they say, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, one of the biggest differences with regards to trust is bigger than institutional trust is interpersonal trust. We value a face. And that's why I was so delighted that when I was here, although the faces have left, except there are a few more beautiful faces, right? Is that when we listen to this story of the socio-cultural pillar, it matters more to us that we are able to attach a face. That's why we swooned in the story of the Ongs, for example. Or when Miss Mikey Cojuangco, of course, was talking about her experiences, we swooned as well, right? Because we recognize a face, and the face is more important to us. Now, in other words, in Asia, people matter. Interpersonal relationships matter. And the 3 other words that I mentioned, remember, social capital, culture, that's about people. When you talk about informality, what they meant by informality is hindi tayo formal dito. Meaning, everything is based on informal ties. Sure, we have our list of procurement, suppliers for the procurement, but determining which supplier we're getting from, in truth, will be determined by, do I have a good rapport? Right? Maayos pang makipag-usap dun sa salesperson. Right? Finally, when you talk about multiplexity, what means that, well, on the one hand, it means that there's double standards. On the other hand, what it means is that, it's really relationships that matter. Right? What is in the book or the rule book sometimes holds, but oftentimes it's a more complicated reality than that. Now, I think we take home from that lecture, right, an important issue to address, and that is the issue of having to deal with people. I got the wonderful opportunity to work on a book called Asian Champions, where we studied the strategies of 58 top-performing champion firms. AIM did this book project with the CEIBS, China-Europe International Business School in San Francisco State University. And one of the things we found out there in that book, 58 strategies, 58 different firms, was that they all employed, and forgive my professor speak, mobilizing institutional grassroots. That's just a big word for having to work from the ground up. And I love how Ambassador Albert put it this morning, that maybe the socio-cultural pillar should have been the first pillar. For many of the other communities abroad, Europe, for example, with all the problems and challenges, good and bad things happening there was always that sense of Europe-ness, which is probably why some people say Brexit happened, because they didn't have that Europe-ness. In our case, it didn't come naturally to us, But as Ambassador Albert said, it's really not a transformation that can happen overnight. It's an evolution. And I'm so glad that we're beginning to work in how to make that evolution happen. You said a while ago, I'm not going to go to the experiences of the others anymore because I think they so well articulated it. But somebody said a while ago, we have to learn about who ASEAN or what ASEAN is and who we are as ASEAN. But I think beyond just knowing that it's ASEAN, not ASEAN, not ASEAN, is we have to develop that attitude. I love what Miss Dida, right, mentioned a while ago, her little snippet, that you get hired for aptitude, but you get fired for attitude. Maybe just to make it more positive, you thrive with attitude. And what is the attitude that we need for the ASEAN integration? Allow me to just use one final analogy, and this is the analogy of a potluck party. We're Pinoys here, many of us are Filipinos, and we love potluck parties. In a potluck party, you're supposed to bring something and eat everything else, right? Many of us, if you're going to volunteer, what do you want to bring to a potluck party? We will say soft drinks, rice, fork and spoon, plastic paper plates. In other words, the easy things, right? But what we want to see there are, I don't know, like lechon, maybe that's me being culturally insensitive, I guess it's, let's say, seafood, right? Squid, whatever curries you have, etc., etc. But you see, in a potluck party, it's going to be funny if you're seen walking to that potluck party bringing rice or bringing paper plates. That's your aptitude, right? You're just bringing paper plates. You're just bringing rice. That's your aptitude. But imagine that potluck Christmas party without rice. Imagine that party without paper, not paper spoons, paper plates or plastic spoons and forks. Imagine that potluck party without soda or ice cream. That's what you always want to bring, right? Now, what is the attitude that's required for a potluck party? The attitude in the potluck party is that everyone who comes to the party is important. And never mind if your aptitude is not at par with everyone else. In fact, what's more important than that is that you have that attitude of finding out what is the place, what is the role you can play in that party. Right? I was watching the Ongs, for example, in their body language here, and I loved how Mrs. Ong gave the final word, right? Right? It was like, and Mr. Ong was like, yes, and you know your place. Anyway, but seriously, oh yeah. That's very important, I think, in a discussion or dialogue about socio-cultural integration, because on the one hand, we have our own prejudices, we have our own insecurities as nations and cultures, right? Some of us will say some of our cultures are whatever. Is it original? Is it derived? Is it damaged? You call it whatever it is. But maybe the social integration comes from looking past those insecurities of nationhood. Instead, looking at the things in the way we are, in fact, very well interconnected. And as Ms. Mikey Cojuangco put it in the realm of sports, you come there to compete, sure, but apparently sports isn't just about getting awards. It really is, corny as it sounds, more about the friendships you build. And that really is what ASEAN integration should be about. I thank you, because I think also thank you as the host for as AIM. So I thank you also for being with us here at Asian Institute of Management. True, as you said, many of our educational facilities are not at par, but I think here at AM we have the attitude to try to look at ASEAN, and I hope you also join us in that attitude of looking ASEAN and global. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Francisco, and thank you very much to all of you for tuning to the forum, ASEAN Identity. Keep posted on the ASEAN 50th anniversary activities this week with hashtag ASEAN 2017 on Facebook for updates. And that concludes the ASEAN 2017 Dialogues, a three-part dialogue forum and webinar on ASEAN's 3 pillars. Thank you. May we request on stage Dr. Francisco for the handover of the token of appreciation and certificate. We would like to request as well on stage Assistant Secretary Chris Ablan and Assistant Secretary Kissinger Reyes to award Dr. Francisco the certificate of appreciation and the token as well.
With me? Oh. Okay, sure.